Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of the book of Psalms. Today we're in Psalm 129, and we are still in the midst of these songs of ascents. And this particular one, unlike some of the others, we don't necessarily have a time frame or an author to account to it. And yet, this particular psalm is going to deal with God's deliverance and his deliverance from those who would subjugate Israel. And so it's not very long, it's 8 verses in length. And yet the subject matter is going to have some interesting ways of being presented. So let's look at what's stated in Psalm 129. Beginning in verse 1, we read, "Many a time they have afflicted me from my youth. Let Israel now say, Many a time they have afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. The plowers plowed on my back, they made their furrows long. The Lord is righteous. He has cut in pieces the cords of the wicked. Let all those who hate Zion be put to shame and turned back. Let them be as the grass on the housetops, which withers before it grows up, with which the reaper does not fill his hand, nor he who binds sheaves his arms. Neither let those who pass by them say, The blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord." As you look at Psalm 129, it is a psalm of deliverance. It is a song that recognizes the deliverance of the Lord. It also recognizes the suffering of being under the thumb of the nations around them or of their enemies. So let's look at a couple of things because there's a couple of pieces of terminology that I found to be really interesting in this song, and I hope will be things that will be beneficial to you as well. In verse 3, you have the statement that the plowers plowed on my back, they made their furrows long. Now, the word for plowers is not talking of individuals, but rather it is a tool or instrument that is used to plow a field. The picture that is being utilized here is that of someone being whipped or scourged, such as you would have with Jesus in New Testament times, but more like the whipping of a slave in ancient times, and in biblical terms, correlating it to what would have taken place in Egypt with the Israelites. But not just there. The indication is from this psalm that there were other occasions where, when the Israelites were in captivity, when they were under the thumb of a foreign ruler, that they had to deal with these particular types of issues that are talked about in this picture. And so you have here the psalmist using the idea of the plowers or the plows and their furrows to illustrate what was done to the backs of his people. And then he says in verse 4 that the Lord is righteous and he has cut in pieces the cords of the wicked. So the things that were binding them, the things that were holding them to those subjugators, were cut. The Lord set them free, is the call of verses 3 and 4. But then in verses 5 through 8, you have those judgments that are going to follow for what they have done to Israel and the way that they have acted toward Israel and toward his people. And so you have in verse 5 the statement that let all those who hate Zion be put to shame and turned back. And then verse 6, another very interesting picture that maybe sounds pretty strange to us. He says, Let them be as the grass on the housetops, which withers before it grows up, with which the reaper does not fill his hand, nor he who binds sheaves his arms. Now, as I've done a little bit of research, there are several different types of dwellings depending upon which time period and which age of living you're looking at in Israel. But you have those dwellings that are made of brick and clay, but they oftentimes would be ones that had roofs to them that were flat roofs, where they would go up and they would sit or they would stand and they would spend time up there. It was like their porch in many different ways. And so it would be simply another level to the house without any rooms necessarily or things of that nature, but it would be something that was a flat surface that on various occasions you would have grass seeds that would be blown onto it and they would try to grow there, but they really basically came up like weeds and then very quickly they died off because there's obviously no root and no real soil for them to delve into. There are other kinds of dwellings that sometimes would have had almost a sod type roof to it. But even then, the grass is going to die off and it's not going to be strong because it's in an area where there is not really any depth there. So there's several different types of options that were available for this particular statement, but obviously they weren't using shingled roofs or things like we would use today with our materials, and so the construct is different and the picture that it engenders is somewhat different as well. But the point that's being made is that the Lord is going to cause those individuals who have been subjugating and harming Israel, that they are going to be like that grass that gets no root, that is simply gathered up and thrown out. It's not going to be gathered for anything useful. The reaper doesn't fill his hand with it. He who binds sheaves does not grab up an armful of it. It is simply worth nothing more than to be cast aside or thrown out into the wind once again. And then he closes in verse 8 by saying, "Neither let those who pass by them say, the blessing of the Lord be upon you." In other words, let there be no blessing for these people. And so you have here in Psalm 129 a message of deliverance that in verses 1 through 4, God is delivering or has delivered Israel from its oppressors. But then also in verses 5 through 8, that there is judgment and that there will be punishments for those who are doing the oppressing. So these are the things that I see in Psalm 129. And I hope that they're things that are beneficial for you, that help you understand the song and help you understand what it's trying to say. Next time, we'll come back and we'll begin looking at Psalm 130. Thank you so much for watching the video today and for joining us in our study. And I hope that you'll continue to do so as we can work our way through the final few chapters of the Psalms. But until next time, I hope you have a great day.